So, seen any good moves lately? Welcome back to episode 9 of Seeing Any Good Moves Lately. I am your host, Joey Olberding, and today I am joined by a reality TV connoisseur, some may say. A harbinger of the fate. I don't know this intro. We have Alec. Hi,
That was the best intro I've ever received. Giving up halfway through. That's perfect. Thank you, Joey. Joey, I'm so happy to be here. I have been itching to get my dirty, grubby mitts all over your podcast for weeks now, and it's finally come to fruition. So I'm very happy to be talking with you today. I wore my
I'm
finest plain brown shirt.
Well, hey, I'm just wearing a blue shirt myself. I didn't wear a suit and tie for the occasion, to be honest. But
But yours has a cool
yeah,
graphic on it.
does have a cool graphic
And
on
I'll
it.
probably be sweating through mine by the end of this.
I'll be real. I don't have any like plain clothes like that. You know what I mean? All my shirts have a design on them. Maybe I need to rock out with something a little more simple. I don't
I
know.
I like a mix. I like to switch it up.
Gotcha.
I sometimes I go a little plain one. Sometimes I go crazy. I have quite a few button up shirts, and
Gotcha. Yeah.
anytime I put one on, I go, "This is what I would wear if I was on this color tribe."
That's awesome. Speaking of awesome, what are you thinking about this season so far of Survivor 48?
Joey, I am of the opinion that this season has been pretty good. I think this season has been underrated and overhated. Yeah, we had a few votes there where there was pretty predictable who was going to go home, and it was a little unanimous vote. And of course, Say being taken off the board is a huge hit to any season of television. But
Yeah.
I think this season has been pretty great. Some of the camp life scenes in this season have been like the most entertaining and like deep dive into the camp life that there's ever been. There's been real like drama and interpersonal conflict, which is something that is missing from a lot of new era seasons. Like it for as kumbaya as so much of this strong six claimed they were going to play. This has not really been kumbaya at all, especially these last two episodes. So I think there's a lot to get into in this season. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm quite as like huge on the season as you are. I don't dislike the season by any means. I think it's a perfectly like fine season of Survivor, which means if it's a fine season of Survivor, that means it's a good season of television. That's how I view it. I will say those early pre-merge votes, some of the chaos with losing votes did frustrate me. But now that we've gotten to the merge, I gotta say, I think the season hasn't been there in terms of moments. There haven't been too many moments that have been like whoa, but the actual narrative of the season, I think, is extremely interesting. Probably the most interesting pure narrative we have had of the new era. I got to speak to that. Because of just the discussion of honor and integrity, something that showed up a lot in this episode, and the discussion of people's morals, which we really haven't gotten at all throughout the rest of the new era at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely a I dare I call it a breath of fresh air. I think some people would disagree with
Yeah,
that, but just there is a part of Survivor that I do like is how of the modern game of Survivor, I should say, is that everyone is kind of on the same page that like this is just what we're all in agreement that anything could happen to any of us. Like there's really it's no holds barred, and it's going to be at the end of the day like a good game. And I think that is healthier for the game state, but sometimes that doesn't always make the most exciting show because a big part of what makes the show exciting is people having issue with the concepts of betrayal
yeah,
and ruthlessness that will inevitably befell them one way or the other. And that is something that Survivor 48 absolutely has working for it. And this episode, my God, betrayal and ruthlessness did appear. Um, the I would also pencil this one in under probably a predictable boot after last episode, just
yeah,
kind of set up with like, oh, David is all of a sudden he's our big villain and we want him to go home. And then what do you know, the next episode he goes home. Isn't it great how that works out?
yeah. It's interesting because on one hand, it is a predictable boot that David goes home. But on the other hand, I mean, you go back to the last episode before this one, Chrissy on her way out is like, David is the kingpin. He's controlling everything. And then he immediately goes home. And it's almost a little anticlimactic. Like David's exit was very good. Great television. His actual exit was very dramatic. But at the same time, I'm like, man, what if he stuck around though? What if he got to final tribal council? You
I
know what I
would
mean?
have. I definitely would have loved to see David stick around. I loved the David heel turn. I think so much of what David's story this was. I mean, in the premiere, he gets like I think David's first confessional, and then one of his confessionals later in the episode is him talking about like, oh, he's coming out here to be the hero, and then he says like, I might be the hero, I might be the villain. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. And it felt like we finally got the payoff of that, which was this David like heel turn, even though he was correct about every single thing that he was saying.
Yeah, yeah,
Approach is very important in the game of Survivor because you could be completely spot on with your read, but if you're rubbing people the wrong way, they will look at that first before they look at whether or not you're correct. So David, correct read, not the correct approach. But this it felt I think that having someone who has the correct read and the incorrect approach is what makes a character exciting. And so I was very excited for the David heel turn. I'm glad we got it, even though it didn't stick around for very long.
yeah. David is a fascinating Survivor contestant to me, truly, because it's been said before, but like he feels like he's from a different era of Survivor. Like he really feels like he just got dropped in from like season 8 or whatever and was told, "Hey, play right now." And I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about who does David remind me of, because he reminds me of someone specific, and it's been on the tip of my tongue for weeks now. And it's like, is it Coach? No, not Coach. It's got to be something else. Is it someone like JT? No, not really. Is it even just like Jonathan or Mike? From 42. And then no. And then it hit me this last episode. I don't know what it was, but something specific was like, David is the new era equivalent of Lex from Survivor Africa and Survivor All Stars. Let me tell you why. He is physically dominant. He's good in challenges. He controls his alliance. He tells people where to vote. And he's extremely suspicious and extremely paranoid. And as soon as somebody turns it around on him, like happened in Survivor All Stars, he is incredibly bitter about it. And is an absolute hypocrite. So
Okay, I can
David.
see that. That is not where I thought you were going. For some reason, I thought you were going to say he's the new era Joel Klug. And I was like bracing to try to piece that together. But okay, I can see it. I would say that no one ever has been as bitter as Lex was in Survivor All Stars.
Look,
But
I
David had a juicy exit. He seems fine now. He seems like he's doing okay. All
yeah.
things considered, his exit press. He is single
Uh,
now.
I'll say this: it's hard to say whether we know whether or not David will be super bitter on the jury or not. I mean, imagine if David gets on the jury and Kyle is at the end in final 3, or Camilla. Like he's gonna not be happy with them, I
Yeah,
think.
I that's a good point. I do have a hard time seeing where David would vote because, and David's exit press kind of weighing into this of him like viewing Joe as someone who was clearly like maybe didn't go against his word intentionally, but he very much did, and he did it because he got duped by Kyle, basically,
Yeah,
is that I have no clue where David's vote would land because he seems to be someone who values honor and integrity. And so I would think up until the way he went out that if he's on the jury and Joe is in the final 3, then he's, that is a guaranteed vote that Joe can count on. But now that this has happened and David has this altered perspective of Joe, I have no idea. Is he going to reward? Because now it's gone. No one is being.
yeah.
I guess Mary. I guess you could probably count on his vote for Mary, but is Mary going to get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if there's anybody like on the season who's destined to be, everybody but one person votes for the winner, I think David's going to be that one person. Like I can imagine
That's a great shout.
a final 3 scenario where it's like, I don't know, it's like Mary, maybe Star, and let's say Kyle. And Kyle gets all the votes, and then David just throws a vote to Mary because I don't know, like he felt like it. Um,
He fits. He fits the type. Last season, it was ironically Kyle who was our like one hinky vote,
yeah,
and I think it's usually is. It's like the strong because Jonathan voted for Mike in
yeah.
42.
Danny voted for Deshaun in 41.
and
So
then and then Danny Massa voted for Heidi in 44,
right, yeah,
and James Jones voted for Cassidy. So it's always like a big, wide man.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. No, I can totally see that because doesn't have like experience with the show really, so he
Yeah,
doesn't. I don't know if he understands what like a winner should be. He might just vote for legitimately who he likes the most, which of course is a valid,
yeah.
jury strategy or whatever. There's no
And
one right way to vote for a winner, but
in a way,
yeah,
that's what a winner is. That's the nice thing about. And what I'll say about David, to speak to his credit, is and just kind of the type of character that he is. There's been a lot of debate that I'm sure that you've seen over the past few seasons online of like people being like, "Oh, we need to bring the Mactors back." The people who've never seen the show, they're like himbo idiots. And David was that person for that group of people who was like touting that. And I didn't want any part of that. I have always found, at least like especially through the 30s, like a lot of the 30s is a slog for me because there's so many people who it's just like there you have these people who really know what they're doing and they know the show well, or they're just clearly more well equipped for the game of Survivor than
yeah,
the other people. And then you have these like half the cast who it's just like you just could never win this game. Like it just will never happen for you. And maybe it's more credit to the editing than David himself, but I actually enjoyed what David was bringing to the show quite a bit, and I feel like a lot of, I'm kind of generalizing the online opinion here, but I feel like the online opinion shifted so hard against this guy in the past few weeks, and it's like this is the guy that you've been asking for since season
yeah,
41. Like this is what you've been wanting the whole time, and I didn't want it, but I thought it added a lot to the season, and I have all these people who are like are so relieved that this guy is gone, who I would have guessed held the opinion of bringing all the Bactors back.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I'm with you mostly. I think I mostly agree with you. I think that David is good in the sense that like he is sure someone who's not very like well versed in the show, but he makes up for it by just being like a very entertaining character and an immediate like standout character. Like the same was kind of true of Q in 46. I
Mhm.
think Q he hadn't seen very many seasons, but then like binged them all right before he went out onto the island, and it
He
shows.
name
And
dropped
his
Aubrey.
yeah, and so his gameplay is kind of wild, but that's what makes Q such a great character. In my opinion, the best character of the new era.
I
Is
hard agree. Hard
Yeah,
agree. I
but that being said, that isn't me saying, "Oh man, we need to just get a ton of people who don't know anything about Survivor," because I think there is a balance you have to have. Like one thing Stephen Fishbach has talked about in the past is seasons he was on had one or two like grenades. People like Abby Maria who were just like when they're on the islands, like the good players have to play around them. And I think that's sort of the role that David possessed here in 48 is like he's this big imposing guy who really like you're not going to get rid of him pre-merge. So he's at least going to be there until the merge. And you kind of have to play around his philosophy of I believe in strength. And it's been interesting seeing people like Kyle and Camilla and Shaheen who don't really subscribe to that belief sort of play around it while others like Eva and Joe are sort of playing into it. And then there's Mary who I guess is like really playing into it. I don't know. But it's interesting to me regardless.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I love that observation. That was something that I had brought up to on the patron Q&A, the RHAP patron Q&A a few weeks ago, where Rob was out of town and Owen and Dwight took over. I had my question for Owen and Dwight, and at the time it was still in the pre-merge, and I was specifically making reference to Say. Because Say was that person for Vula, where it was just
Sure.
like you have five relatively normal people, and then this person that you cannot ignore for a second. And it's just how does your approach to the game shift when you have someone who is just so, and like it's Survivor, so everyone on Survivor is a big character in their own right, but you
Sure.
have like Owen was on a tribe with Gabler to start the game, and Dwight was on a tribe with Cody to start the game, and it's like these people are just so out there and zany and have their own way of doing things that like just if this might sound, I don't intend for this to sound insulting. I actually mean it in a very high compliment, but take all of the energy and air out of a room and bring it to themselves because you
Yeah.
just can't ignore them. And they had really well thought out answers of how that is a factor of the game that they like, and it is even more impactful than you'd think on screen, or than it comes across on screen, of like it fully takes up your day just having that person be there and having to play around them. And so yeah, that I hadn't made that connection for David specifically this season, but I think that's a good shout. I think he's definitely that person on the oh my god, hang on, don't tell me. I'm usually very on the Siva tribe. On the Siva tribe.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I like your observation because, there's a lot of talk about like, well, who's going to be on Survivor 50 and, blah, 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 and stuff like that. And a lot of people are saying Carolyn, 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 Carolyn because people love Carolyn. First of all, I don't know really if I need to see her again. She was just on Traders. Like, I don't need, but that's besides the point. What I'm saying is like, if I were on a season with someone like Carolyn, I would not want to work with her. I feel like working with someone like Carolyn or, a Say or someone like that would be extremely exhausting. And like maybe I could win in the end against them, but like you have to imagine like living on an island, not being able to escape from them ever is just so crazy. I don't know how so many people like yeah, it's wild to me. I mean, I'm sure you get bonded to them, but still.
Yeah, I totally see it. I think I've Gabe Ortiz from Survivor 47 had a thing recently where like he kind of expressed that same point that you expressed, where he was like during the airing of the season, when around the time of the merge of season 47, people were like, oh, well, they got to keep Rome around because they can just take him to the end. And then Gabe was like, it's very easy for you to say that when you weren't living with Rome. Yeah. And so it's very easy for me to say this and to disagree with you when I haven't actually been living with these people in the most barren environment possible. But I would not take that approach. I would absolutely. I am finding the weirdest person I can find, and I'm hitching my cart to them because historically, those people can do very well. Like I think that is like Carolyn did make it to the end, and the guy who hitched his cart to him won the game. And the like. I guess the same thing happened with Gabler, where Gabler did make it to the end. He ended up winning, but who could have predicted such a thing? And like those people go far, and I think the people that make them their people do go far, unless you don't tell Cedric that you lost your vote.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's really easy for me to want to say like, yeah, I agree with you, but also I try to put myself in the place of the contestants' minds on like episode 1. Like, let's say I am Rachel on Survivor 47, and the first episode, Andy goes up to me and he's like, Joey, I feel we have such a connection. I really want to work with you. And then he crashes out on the mat and is jealous of people opening coconuts. I don't want to attach myself to that wagon. You know what I mean? Or if I'm on Survivor 45 and I'm on I don't remember the tribe names, but the yellow tribe name. And I'm on the mat and Emily's just calling out Bruce for seemingly no reason and is very, very like, not fitting in with the tribe dynamics at all. I didn't necessarily want to hitch myself to that wagon, at least not straight away. So I don't know. There's a balance. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the thing with Survivor is you can have a game plan, but everything is extremely situational, and depending on how you end up, what could be the right decision on one season is, and with one group of people, is the worst decision that you could possibly make, and you make it, and then everyone remembers you as the worst Survivor player of all time because you made a decision that was the correct decision somewhere else, but not on this one. And that's the beauty of the game is that it's people shoot down and I didn't like the like dice rolling journey either. I didn't hate the fact that the game that it was dice rolling. I hated the fact that it was, and I also didn't hate the fact that you like once you got there you had to play. I hated that both existed at the same time. Yeah. Like if it was one or the other, then it's like okay, I'm choosing to play this game of chance, or I have to play this, but it's up to my own ability. I don't think you can get away with both, but that's old news. But anyway, chance is a huge thing in Survivor, and whether it's coming in the form of Yahtzee or in the form of the entropy of life, so much of it comes down to luck.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and part of me almost thinks that like David, going back to this season, like he was both lucky and unlucky because he was lucky enough to be on a season where other people were receptive to the idea that like, oh
Yes.
yeah, we need to do this strong person's alliance. But I also think there was a bit of like bad luck just in the sense that I don't know. I guess this isn't luck, but like he was one tiny movement away from winning immunity. And if he wins immunity there, he's probably in control of the game for the rest of the way going forward.
And that's all it's like Jeff says in the moment when he's putting the necklace on Joe and David's like mad at himself. He's like, yeah, it's Survivor. Sometimes that's all it is. Like sometimes people make 1,000 mistakes and they still win, and sometimes people make the smallest mistake ever and then it's just over. And David's mistake was that he like I don't even know what happened. He like slipped a little bit on a pedestal. It happens.
Yeah.
Life comes at you fast.
Yeah, it happens.
Joey, how do you think you would do at the Crocodile Rock challenge that we watched today?
Terrible. I mean, here's the thing. David has like 10 more muscles than my body has combined. So, like, and if he couldn't do it, like, I don't know. I'm not doing it. Like between Joe and David and Joey Olberding, who's winning that challenge, it's not me.
Hey,
I'm like star. I'm not in the second.
You got to get one of the Charlie Davis grippers. You never know when you might need some grip strength in your life. I'd be locked the hell in on that. I'd be, oh my God.
I guess.
I get into that Crocodile Rock thing. The crocodile's going to have to come and eat me because I'm not getting off that fucking pedestal, man. Are we allowed to swear on the Joey Olberding podcast?
Yeah.
I don't.
No one cares.
Nobody
or at least I hope you don't. Yeah.
And if you do, my bad.
Sorry. Yeah.
My fault.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we can't really talk about this episode too much without talking a little bit about the last episode where we saw Chrissy go home unanimously. She gave an impassioned speech against honor and integrity. What did you think about that episode?
Shout out to Chrissy. Like I was usually when we have a Chrissy on Survivor, which is an older woman who's getting no confessionals, they make it to the finale.
Yep.
For some reason, they're just there the whole time, and so I was like, "Oh, Chrissy's going to be here the whole time," and then she wasn't. And but shout out to Chrissy, she made quite the name for herself in her last episode and a quarter of being the only person to really stand up against this alliance. And I enjoyed that very much as a viewer. But from a game perspective, not only was it just a bad decision to do that the way that she did it, but also she didn't actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
She was just saying do something about it. And then she wasn't, at least as far as we saw, wasn't doing anything about it. She pitches Shaheen to Kyle for like a second, and Kyle's like, no, we should. What Kyle? I don't even know. Kyle throws some other name to her, and she's like, okay, we'll do that. And it's just like, or no, sorry, I have that backwards. She pitches Joe, Kyle, whatever.
Yeah.
That was the only thing that we got of her actually strategizing at camp was like, and the rest of it was just her in confessional or in front of everyone when they've already decided who they're voting for, making her case. It's like, don't tell me who to vote for. I'm not there. I'm the viewer. Tell the people who to vote for when they're still deciding on who to vote for. So Chrissy, I don't think Chrissy was ever destined to make a deep run in this game, but to go out in a blaze of glory like that, especially after you've had a quiet season, and the viewers are left wondering who you are, it's quite a way for them to remember who you are. Is you're the woman who yelled at the alliance before you went out the door.
You want to know
people never do that anymore.
Yeah, that's true. You want to know what Chrissy's crash out kind of reminded me of?
Hit me.
It reminded me of an even lamer version of Sierra Easton in Survivor's Second Chances, where she is kind of just on the bottom, and she knows she's on the bottom, and she's kind of trying to do things, but like not really. And she keeps saying at Tribal Council, we need to make big moves. Let's do big moves, everybody. Let's do big moves. We should be doing big moves. Which kind of ushered in the big moves era, which persisted for like 10 seasons afterwards. But she wasn't actually like doing anything. She was basically like, please, someone just like do something. Do it.
Yeah, somebody do something for me. Because that's what happened. That's what happened to her in Blood versus Water. She was doing nothing, and then Hayden did something for her. And she was like, oh, I guess this is how Survivor is played. Is somebody eventually somebody comes along and they tell you what to do, and then they do that. And you just have to sit there and wait for it to happen.
Yeah, and she got
Joey,
invited for 2 more seasons after that. Yeah. Anyways, go
yay.
ahead. Yeah.
Do you what is your thought on that? Because you've noted that the big moves era, you were talking about it as though it was over, and while I think it definitely should be over, I don't actually know if it is. Um, the because Winners at War, I think should have been the death of the big moves era, where Tony, of
Sure.
course, is making big moves, but he's never saying the words big moves or resume. He's walking you through a logical thought process of this person is causing me this problem right now or will be causing me this problem in the future, so I need them to go, and then here is how I got these people to agree with that line of thinking. And then he gets to the end, and then he's talking about how he made the spy nest, and he's making the jury laugh, and he's not talking about the 4-3-2 vote on Sophie. And
Yeah.
for all intents and purposes, that should have been the death of the big moves era, and then it wasn't. At least not that I think. I kind of think we're still in it. And then I think there was a second death of the big moves era, which, in my opinion, if they weren't going to take that lesson from season 40, the lesson should absolutely be taken from season 47 to stop just doing the craziest thing that you can for the sake of doing it. Because we see, I think it happens twice in 47 where it's a terrible idea to just, somebody makes a big move that is impressive, really well pulled off, and a terrible idea, where Genevieve flips the vote on Saul and then is on the bottom for the entire game, and no one is ever going to go to the end with her because she just pulled off this crazy move on Saul. And then Operation Italy. We all love Operation Italy. It was incredible to watch, and it was really well done and impressive and a great use, maybe the best use of a fake idol like ever. Incredibly well done. The two of the people involved in Operation Italy go out one after the other, and then the third person gets put to fire, miraculously wins fire because of the wind, and then gets one vote at the end. And it's a woman who didn't really make anything. I guess the idling out of Andy was probably the big move, but that is a well-timed big move. Like that there was so much, obviously that is separate from what I'm talking about. So eventually people will have to learn the lesson of stop shuffling the deck for the sake of shuffling the deck, because the order of the cards as it stands might be the order where you win. But that's my take on the big. But do you disagree? Do you think that the big moves era is over?
I think it is over in this sense. I think you're right that if they really wanted to vote for the person who made the biggest move in Survivor 47, theoretically they would have voted for Sam because he was the one in the worst spot. Rachel got to the end because she won immunity and, played an idol, which I guess, that is a move. But I mean, it was a very obvious move to make, and kind of a circumstantial thing. No, I think the big moves era died not in Survivor 47. I think it died in Survivor 46. And here's what I mean by that. I have a few different reasons. Number one, everybody on that season seemed to get an idol. Everybody on that season was like, I need to save this idol for the perfect moment. I need to use this idol in the best way I possibly can. And then Jem goes home with an idol. Tiffany goes home with an idol. Hugh goes home with an idol. Venus goes home with an idol. I think I'm missing someone.
You're missing
else.
Hunter. Hunter also went home with an idol. And technically, Randon got medevaced with a Beware advantage, so that's half a point.
Yeah, so all these people waiting for the perfect moment to fulfill their big move, to fulfill the best move that they could possibly make, all get wiped out because they're thinking too narrowly. They're not thinking big picture. They're thinking, I need to do like a Marianne and I need to shock the jury. I need to do something that's going to make people be like, whoa, they were the game player this season. And that's one part of it. The other part of it is, of course, who wins the season, which is Kenzie. Kenzie over Charlie, I mean, look, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Charlie in the world, but he deserved to win, in my personal opinion.
You were saying that to the wrong man, Joey. Joey, you're gonna open a whole can of worms with me. We can get into this.
To finish my point, regardless, Kenzie definitely did not make any big moves. She was on the bottom. She had her number one ally blindsided, and from then on, she was basically just kind of using her social game to get further and further into the game, and eventually won on the back of how liked she was, not on any moves that she made necessarily. When Charlie was sort of the strategic, gamey player, more so to some extent. I think that should have been the death of the big moves era. But you're right. I don't know if people have really understood that because you're right because of Andy trying to make that big move in 47.
Well,
Yeah,
another important thing to note about the lessons from 46 is that the people who played on season 47 saw a few people go out with idols, but they didn't actually make it to the end of the season before they played. Where
yeah,
I believe the Tiffany boot is, so they see the three people go out with idols, but we never get. They didn't know that it was going to happen two more times, and then Kenzie was going to win. And perhaps 48, some of the like change of pace and gameplay is, maybe you are correct, is indicative of the result of 46 playing out in the way it did. But I have a feeling that there's going to be, starting with this episode, a stark change of pace for the rest of the season.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Eva still has an idol out there. She still has different stuff. Um, okay, I gotta ask. Kenzie over Charlie. Don't
So
got it.
so here is my thing with Kenzie, and I will speak to her game, and then I will speak generally of Survivor. The first point to her game is that the and we see only a glimpse of this, but in Survivor, perception is everything. And you can make
Yeah,
every single move in the book. You could play on paper the best game, but if the jury doesn't perceive it that way and perceive you in the way that that you were the one controlling everything, then that's on you. Like that is totally on you, and that is a failure on your part. And props to Kenzie. There is this episode of Survivor 46 where they're in like the home stretch of the season, where
mhm,
Kenzie is talking about them being like a messed up family, and like, oh, like Liz is like the grandma, or Maria's the grandma, and I'm
right.
like this person, and this person's my zany brother, and Charlie's the family dog, and the entire jury laughs at him for being the family
Mm,
dog. And I think that it is a difficult tightrope to walk of having that perception to get you deeper into the game, but then shedding that perception at the correct moment so that when you get to the end, you don't have to do that in Final Tribal and try to be like, no, I'm not the family dog. Like, I'm the
yeah,
dude holding the leash. Like, this is not like you were wrong. And Charlie did a pretty good job. He got 3 votes
yeah,
of the 8 on the board, but he didn't clinch it. And so that, to speak to Kenzie's game, and I guess against Charlie's game also, to speak to Survivor generally, I don't believe that there is a single example of anybody who should have won a season of Survivor, because the only criteria for winning a season of Survivor is getting to the end and getting the most jury votes. If
yeah,
somebody should have won a season, what criteria is that based on? I think it's
sure.
completely fair to say that if I was on the jury, I would have voted for a different person than the winner.
Yeah, that's more what I meant,
Like,
honestly. But yeah,
I would have, like, if I was on the 43 jury, I would have voted for Owen, and I would have been the only person to do that in pretty much any iteration of the jury. Does that mean that I think that Owen should have won the game? No, he clearly shouldn't have. The jury didn't vote for him.
yeah,
And so that is my pushback on the whole Charlie was robbed, like, Charlie should have won mindset, is that I think that is. No offense to Charlie, I just think that is an impossible thing to happen, is for you to should have won and then you don't.
yeah. No, I think you're right. I should have used better language, I think, in wording my hot take. Yeah, no, I definitely would have voted for Charlie, I think, just
And that's
because,
fair.
like,
That's totally fair. That is totally fair to say.
I,
It was close. They both
yeah,
played great games.
yeah, and I think that the shedding of the family dog narrative, to speak to that point, it's like I think Charlie did probably as good of a job as he could have because he did make the final big move of the season to sort of say, "Hey, I've been here and I've been strategic this whole time." Now, it wasn't a move that everybody loved, see Maria, but I mean, it shed the perception one way or another. Maybe
Mhm.
it shed it too hard. I don't know. Maybe he would have
Maybe.
won if he didn't do it and just brought Maria to the end. Who knows?
I think really, I think he can do everything the same. He just needs Kenzie to go out at 4 and then he wins.
Yeah.
However, that happens, and Liz was not the person for that job. Um, because of her,
No.
I believe Liz's genetically abnormally large ligaments in her wrist was what was blamed for her loss in the fire making challenge. Um,
That's crazy. People will draw him about anything. That's wild. Um,
this to call back to the 46 finale. After that sequence of Liz talking about her large ligaments, Jesse Lopez had an amazing tweet which said, "I wish Gabler's ligaments were too big for his wrists," and I love that. I think about that most evenings. Um,
yeah.
but enough about 46.
Yeah. Let's jump 2 seasons ahead. Let's talk about 48. I don't know. Where do you want to start? Any
So
thoughts?
I, ooh, what I'm trying to. Maybe I'll just start here. How big are you into Edgic, Joey?
Not very. I mean, I watch the show and I pick up like who's getting more confessionals than other people, but I don't pay attention to like Edgic stuff at all.
Okay, I won't dive too far into it then, but I am extremely Edgic oriented in my watching of the show, and I will say I think that is what has made this season more enjoyable for me because this is if you go to reddit.com/r/edgic right now and you look at all the posts, it's like 300 people completely disagreeing with each other, and there are like of this final 9, there are like 6 people on the board who are like one of these people is going to be the winner, and
Yeah.
that like never happens. And so this is a really exciting home stretch of a season where it feels like it's really wide open. I am quick plug. I run a if you go to the Edgic subreddit, every week I make a post called the elimination based approach to Edgic. I believe here, let me toot my own horn real quick. Let me get a stat check on myself. Hang on. I
I'll
apologize.
No, while you pull it up, I'll just say that like it has been interesting editing wise, in my opinion, because like there's been a lot of subversion of expectation. Like I remember episode 1, when we introduced Thomas, and maybe episode 2, people were like, "Oh man, Thomas is going far. Like he's an interesting fellow. He's long for this world. He's definitely not going to go home pre-merge." And then he goes home
And then he goes
pre-merge.
and remerge. And yeah, it's stuff like that. Is the early seasons are always because sometimes you watch the first few episodes of a season, whether if you're just like casually watching it or if you're super into reading the edit, and you're like,
Mm,
I think this person's gonna win, and then they go home the next week, and then
yeah,
sometimes it's when it's not quite as fun. For some seasons, you watch like episode 2, and you're like, this person's going to win, aren't they? And then they win, and it's a little less exciting. But this season, it's been very exciting for that. And then I can't even find the stat. But if you're into Edgic, I make a write up every week on the Edgic subreddit, an elimination based approach to Edgic, where basically instead of trying to find the winner, I try to find all 17 losers. And every week I eliminate someone permanently from winner contention. My post for this episode just went up. When will this video be out, Joey? This
I
podcast.
like it as soon as we're done,
Oh my
basically.
goodness! Wow, it's a quick turnaround. Well, it just went up today, right before, like it was the last thing I finished doing before I signed on to this podcast. So that is live now. You can see I'm down to. I have narrowed my contenders down to 3 people, but I'm not gonna bore on about that for too long. My plug and kind of the lens that I'm coming from. Let's get to this episode specifically and more the what we have in front of us, because I would love to talk to you about
Mhm.
Kyle and Shaheen's gameplay here.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
I think
I
that or go no, please.
I was just gonna say, I think if you get into that, you have to talk about their gameplay last week too, and what their gameplay's been to this point. Because Kyle and Shaheen may be working together, but they're working together in very different ways. Like Shaheen, in my opinion, like has basically kind of been in the background in this merge so far, which I think is nothing but a good thing for him. While he's also being still one of the most like people are like, oh well, we got to get rid of this guy. People around, if not the most of that caliber of that category, while Kyle, especially last episode, has been very upfront and very in the spotlight. and was the person pushing a back against David's wanting Camilla to go home last episode, which I think puts both of them in very interesting spots because both of them are kind of trying to do the same thing in the game right now, but they are in very different positions at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah. They definitely feel like they're pulling the strings for a lot of the votes. Shaheen maybe a little inexplicably so, because it doesn't really feel like Shaheen has made his big splash, but we're always off to the side with Shaheen while he's clocking Eva coming out of camp, or he's having a
Yeah.
sit down with Say and just saying exactly is the only person to really get who Say is all season. We get all these little bits of Shaheen that just
Yeah.
are filled with so much promise and make him seem like this good player, but he's really not actually doing that much right now. And then Kyle, on the other hand, is busting his ass to make these votes come together. Watching Kyle has been one of the like highlights of the season for me, where like there's always so much stakes involved in what he's doing, where he's at
Yeah.
the end of this episode before tribal, he was like I gotta make this work, or if not, I might still be here, but my game is in the gutter. And it's like he's always just like, I gotta run and talk to Shaheen and tell him this thing and make it seem personal for him, and then I gotta run and talk to Joe and tell him about my personal life and how I got arrested to make Joe to explain why I'm acting weird and not make Joe think that I'm acting weird for any weird reason. And then I gotta run and talk to Eva, and I gotta run. He's always running around and doing stuff, and he has all these plans, and he is busting his ass to make stuff come together. And I really appreciate that from Kyle, because so often we see these guys on Survivor, like, speaking of Charlie, I think Charlie's a great example of this, Charlie's just kind of like, well, I'm going to make this happen. And then he does it. And there's never any resistance or anything. And it's just like, okay, like it, but with Kyle, it feels like he's on a mission the whole time. There's struggle. There's stakes. There's resistance. It's exciting.
It's very interesting because I don't mean to get too much back into the editing talk we just got done with, but the difference between the two of them is so interesting because Kyle theoretically is like the main character of the season in the sense he's the one where you have the most insight into his thought process and what he wants to have happen. It was basically him and David, and now one of those two is gone. And then you have Shaheen, who at the same time is getting all of the confessionals about like, yeah, I understand, say, I understand how to play around this. Like, I'm thinking about what I have to do right now, and I'm just going to lay low for now. So it's really interesting, like, because there are two different camps where you could say, like, oh, this person's winning or this person's winning based on that. To me, if I had to choose, like, if I'm really trying to read the edit, who I would think is going to win, I would probably say Shaheen's going to win, though my winner pick episode 1 was Joe, and I'm still kind of in the I hope Joe wins sort of thing. But yeah.
How do you feel this episode went for Joe and Eva? Because ultimately they do end up on the right side of things, and we like Eva has like it kind of is placed on them a little bit, where they have this like they are positioned in the middle, where it's like, yeah, Kyle and Shaheen are trying to pull in the people from the bottom, but it's ultimately we can have the two of us as a unified pair can swing this either way. So how do you what do you think about Joe and Eva's decision to cut David here?
This is probably going to be a bad answer, not the one that you're looking for, but I'm honestly pretty neutral on it. I think either way they went, they would be in an okay spot, not a great spot. Because I think about it like this: if the problem with Joe and Eva voting out David is that David was a solid number for them, that he wasn't going to betray them, he was going to go to the end with them, he's going to vote with them no matter what. But the problem is, and also David would always be a bigger physical threat than Joe or Eva. The problem with voting for David is that by voting for David and trying to be all integrity alliance, like we're not going to flip whatever, you basically just render any like strategic gameplay that you have as purely being like, nothing because, oh, you don't actually care about playing this game. You only care about loyalty. You're not a real player in this game. So if Joe or Eva get to the end, they're probably not going to win against someone like Kyle or Camilla at that point. So I think, I guess, quote unquote, flipping and going with the numbers is a good thing for them in the sense that Joe and to an extent Eva can still be looked at as strategic players. The problem is they don't have that insurance anymore, and Joe and Eva are now the biggest physical threats in the game. But also at the same time, a power struggle is about to start between Kyle and Camilla and Shaheen and all these, and I guess Mitch and Star and all these players are going to start going at each other. And Eva and Joe are still a duo. Their numbers, I don't think people are going to target the numbers who could go any way, especially when, despite them going with the numbers, I don't think either of them are perceived as being that strategic right now. So
Mhm.
I guess
And
I lean that it was a good thing for them. I guess the
I
more I talk about it.
I think you're kind of convincing me because I was originally on the that this was a bad choice. But what else are they gonna do? They're gonna like throw their votes onto Mitch instead and like piss off Kyle and Shaheen and then have the
Exactly.
alliance blow up anyway. I would much rather be going against Mary than going against Kyle and Shaheen and getting them on my bad side.
Yeah.
Like, and also Eva has all the trinkets and stuff. Granted, people know about the trinkets, which makes the trinkets usually much considerably weaker. But
Mhm.
Eva has all the trinkets, and sometimes when you have the trinkets, that can scare people out of making a move against you. So they have this. Joe and Eva are going to be very tough to break up, even though I think that their most immediate point of danger is going to be immediately following this, where you have, and we see into the preview, and I don't really like to read into the previews too much because I feel like they will either tell you exactly what's going to happen or completely
Nothing.
mislead you,
Yeah.
and you cannot know which is which until you like it's a 50-50 coin flip until you get to the episode. So I don't want to read into them too much, but it does seem like Joe's name is coming out there from the people who were formerly on the bottom, and now the 4-4 split seems to be the setup of Mitch, Star, Camilla, and I'm assuming Mary, who is no longer
Mhm.
with the Strong Alliance after this, and then the people who were formerly the Strong Alliance. But this thing is, they just have all of the little toys, and sometimes you don't even have to play them correctly. You just have to let people know that you have them, and then that'll
Yeah.
scare them out of doing something. It can backfire, and then people know that you have them, and then they make you feel comfortable, and then you don't play them, and then you go home. So we'll see. But I think that Joe and Eva, this was a little bit of a loss for them, but it could potentially set up to gain a lot of distance and traction in the future. So potentially
Yeah.
minor setback, major comeback.
It's interesting because it's a good move for them. I think one of the most powerful thing that Joe and Eva has is they have a lot of allies. They got rid of, sure, David's not on their side anymore, which is bad for them. They lose one amount of insurance. But we're at what? We're at final 8 now.
Yes.
If you want to make a move against Joe and Eva, you have to get at least one of Kyle, Camilla, and Shaheen against them, and Star. And I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know if Star's going to try to go against Eva at this point. I don't think Shaheen's going to try to go against Joe. I don't think Kyle's going to try to go against Joe. And if you blindside one of the two of them, you're blindsiding the other, and they're going to go score and earth on you. And you might even lose their jury vote because they're so, loyalty conscious and
Mhm.
all that stuff. So I think
Yeah.
it's really tough to make a move against them. I think it's the type of thing where like you have to get somebody else to make a move against them. You have to be like, oh yeah, no, Mitch, you want to play this game? Yeah, yeah. Who do you want to go after? Did I hear you say Joe? Oh, that's a great idea. That sort of thing.
I mean, that's kind of what happened this episode because there was a lot of anti-David sentiment in this episode where like we see Kyle and Shaheen's conversation where the Kyle spills the beans and he's like, "Hey, David is saying all this stuff about you and Camilla." We have the conversation with Joe and Eva where Joe is like suspect of David's recent behavior. But both of those conversations end. Kyle and Shaheen get on board to vote out Mary. And then Joe's last pitch to Eva is the person giving me pause is Mary. And then it's not until we go to Mitch at the reward where he's the first one to be like, I want to get rid of David tonight. And then Shaheen's like, Mitch wants to get rid of David. That sounds awesome to me.
Yeah,
And then we
yeah.
get it, and then the ball starts to get rolling on. It's no longer Mary. Now it's David. And it's all just because everyone was kind of trying to take the half measure of leaving David in the game, but getting rid of this like quasi alliance member that's giving him the power. But it's like if you don't want someone to have power, don't get rid of their power. Get rid of them. And Mitch, so props to Mitch. I thought a quiet episode for Mitch, but I thought this was a fantastic episode for Mitch. He's teaching people how to swim. and he's getting rid of David, and he's
Yeah,
staying alive. Mitch is somebody that I think has. I want to talk about the people who are on the bottom here, who are
sure.
outside of this alliance. And specifically, I think Mary is now outside of the alliance, but was at least partially in the six. She was the sixth of the six, and then you have Camilla, who it's like, oh, she's like on the bottom, but she's like Kyle's got her, and like we know that
Yeah,
she's not really on the bottom. The people who are really on the bottom are Star and Mitch. And
mhm.
what do you think the path forward for them is? Is it simply just Mitch keep saying a name of the biggest man in the cell block and then hope that everybody takes a swing at him until it backfires? Or what do you think the path here is if you're Mitch or if you're Star?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And in the last episode that I did, which I did with CJ, we talked a lot about the path to the end, the path to actually winning for each and every contestant left in the game. And we both agreed that for Mitch and Star specifically, they had to make a move this past episode. And arguably, I guess you could say that Mitch did, but he's still on the bottom. So I don't really think so. I think, quite honestly, neither of them have a path to win. They have paths to the end. I don't think either of them have a path to win, unless it is specifically Mitch, Star, and Mary as the final three. I think anybody else beats all three of them. I think Camilla wins against them. I think Joe wins against them. Kyle wins against them. I think Eva wins against them. I think Cheyenne wins against them. So in the final three of Mitch, Star, and Mary, I guess Mitch would probably win. And that's what Mitch has to have as his path. But I don't think he's going to get there. I think people are too threatened by his story and, I guess how good he was in the Challengers pre-merge. Star, I think, is way more likely to get to the end. That being said, Star is going to really have to hope for everything to implode, and,
Yeah.
for somehow to, I don't know, have Cheyenne be the most hated man in America or something like that. For her to have a real shot at winning, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Star might probably be out and winning realistically. Like trying to think of on the island, like who it is hard just because we see so little of her and like we don't really see what people think of her since following the merge.
Yeah.
But I think that is probably the most realistic person where I'm like, I'm not sure that you actually have a way to get the jury votes in the end. But I'll push back and I'll say that I think that Mitch is somebody who kind of has the like sauce to pull out like an underdog victory where he is extremely we know that he's extremely well liked. For some reason people view him as a big threat. We don't really know why, but we at least know that people are saying it. And then
Yeah.
there's also been all of this talk about Mitch being this challenge beast, which we saw it in the pre-merge, Mitch don't miss. Hunter gets
Mhm.
them balls in his hand, it's done. But we haven't. Mitch. I think there's a Mitch like challenge tear coming up, and with David out of the way, and with potentially if people are looking at Joe, which is going to be a tricky shot to take, but if that shot can land, I think the immunity necklace is up for grabs in a really big way that it wasn't for a lot of the people after this, and maybe that's the little boost that Mitch needs to go on some like immunity run. And as we saw last season, like you can be in control and you can have Operation Italy, but
Yeah.
if you can go on the right run in the right way and be the person that is kind of this inexplicable big threat where you just are threatening in your presence, not necessarily in the things that you've done, that can be enough to get you to the end and to win the game. And
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely for Mitch. I think he probably has the most uphill battle of like most of except for like Star probably, but I don't think it's out of the cards for Mitch.
Yeah. It's interesting. Mitch was obviously very good at the pre-merge challenges, but so far in the post-merge challenges, which are a lot more about endurance and balance and that sort of thing, it's typically been David up to this point, Eva, and Joe at the end, and then Shine kind of in the mix, sort of, and Kyle, a lot of Kyle. Yeah.
He's fine, but Mitch has finally gotten his reward. There's this whole thing. Mitch is so hungry.
Hey,
Mitch is hungry, and then
that's
Joe
true.
gave him the reward, and maybe he was like, you know what? This ham and cheese wrap is going to propel me. I'm going to win. I'm going to break Australian Survivor spoilers. If you haven't seen Brains versus Brawn 2, cover your ears. Now Mitch is going to break the record, the global record. He's going to win 8 immunity necklaces.
Wow.
Because of ham and cheese.
I will say this. You said that Star is the person that you see, with the least shot of victory. I disagree. I think Star still has more of a chance to win than Mary, who,
Really?
if you've been listening to the podcast, you at home, I have been a Mary. I like Mary, but I've been a Mary hater for a while now. I think she has no shot at winning. And I think this episode was even more evidence as to why, because she basically put all her eggs into one basket. She said, "Okay, I am going to go on this David train. It's going to be me and him, and we're gonna do this. I'm going to be the person who eats up all of David's votes at the end, and it's going to be great for me." And then now that's gone for her. I made the comparison last episode when CJ was on that Mary was trying to be the Parvati to David's Russell Hantz, where David gets all the hate and David gets all the hatred, and then Mary gets to win at the end. But of course, as you and I both know, Parvati did not win that season. And I think if it had been a situation where it was like David, Mary, and someone, maybe like I don't know, maybe a Mitch, maybe a Star. I think Mitch or Star wins in that scenario, but that scenario is not around anymore, and so I think it's just a really, really tough spot for Mary.
That's a very good assessment, and
also, one more point. This is the point I always say. She is completely unique with everybody else in the game in the fact that she has been voted out, and nobody else has been voted out. And I know if I were on the jury, me personally, me voting, I would not vote for somebody who got saved with a shot in the dark, basically no matter what.
But it was so long ago, Joey. It was so long ago. There's one person on the jury who was even there. There's one person on the jury who was even there for that. I don't necessarily agree with that line of thinking. I think in most scenarios I do agree, but I think Mary is a special case where like she was up against a relentless Say, which not everyone on the jury was there for what happened, but everyone on the jury had met Say, and she was up against the unstoppable force that was Say, and then she lands a shot in the dark that negates two votes. Like that's gonna discount you from winning? I think not that I'm saying that, like, I think you then have to, of course, earn the path after that, and I think that will permanently be a point against you in front of a jury, but I don't think it's disqualifying. However, maybe I'm giving Mary a bit too much credit, because I think that Mary has Michelle Fitzgerald Winners at War steez, which is part of what I love Michelle Fitzgerald as a game player. So much of it is for her Winners at War game, and obviously I'm Tony. As we discussed, Tony won. Tony's the deserving winner, and if I was on the jury, I would have voted for Tony. But Michelle deserves a shout out, because I think that Michelle played one of the best 0-vote finalist games ever, and one of the best playing from the bottom games ever, where she had this incredible ability to be on the bottom, grab someone, and then be like, okay, we're on the bottom together. What are we going to do? And then they try to do something and it doesn't work, but then that person goes out instead. And she just kept finding new people to be on the bottom with. And then they kept going home instead of her. And it never stopped. And then she got to the end and she was like, I was on the bottom the whole time, but they couldn't get rid of me. Everybody wanted me gone and you couldn't get rid of me. And I think that is usually not a winning game. I think it takes a lot to win from that seat, but it's still admirable. And I think that Mary kind of has that same trajectory, and I could totally see her doing that into the end game, where she had Kevin, and she was like, she had Stephanie, and she was on the bottom, and then Stephanie went home immediately, and then she's now with Kevin, and she's like, Kevin, what are we gonna do? And then Kevin goes home, and then she had nobody for a little bit, and then she had David. And then it was like, David, what are we gonna do? And then David goes home. And then now she's floating again. And pretty soon she'll scoop somebody else up. And it's just like they'll just be like, why am I in it? Like, why am I now here with you? And then they'll get the stink on them, and then they'll go home. And it'll keep being whoever Mary globs up, and it will never actually be Mary. And so I think she has a clear path to the end. I think that is, again, very tricky to win from, but I admire it, and I think it's impressive personally to be able to do that.
To me, Alec, what you are describing is a classic case of New Era Zero Vote finalist syndrome. That is the exact gameplay of the person you would vote for, Owen Knight, essentially, and that's especially essentially the gameplay of Jake from Survivor 45, who was on the bottom with Caleb. Caleb went home. Was on the bottom with Katura. Katura eventually went home. I mean, like, to me, it's the same sort of thing. And if that's the best case scenario for Mary, like, it's a rough spot. And like, I agree, Michelle's gameplay in Winners of War is fantastic, but the two people she sat next to at the end were the person who probably played one of the best social games in Survivor history, and Tony, at least from how I see it. And he also played a fantastic strategic game. And then somebody who fits the big moves mold, who also had everybody on the jury's side, while Michelle, despite her great game, didn't really have either of those things. And I think that's sort of something that we see a little more often in the new era. Not to talk about Survivor 46 again, but that's sort of the dynamic between Charlie is sort of the well-liked, he's the strategic mind, and Kenzie's the person who everybody on the jury loves. And then, boy, I can't even remember who's the other person.
It was Ben.
And then Ben. Ben's the person. He was also always on the bottom. Ben also fits that mold. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fantastic. If you can do that, if you're that kind of player, you can basically guarantee yourself the 85K or whatever the third placer gets. You will have a very uphill battle. Are there any winners that have really done that? I guess is that Sandra's Heroes Villains game?
Yeah, that's Sandra. Yeah, for sure. It's probably Sandra both times, honestly.
I think I
disagree. Pearl Islands.
I don't think she was on the bottom. I don't think she was on the bottom the whole time in Pearl Island. I think she really gets some traction in the merge.
She was on the Drake tribe, so yeah, she got carried to the end just because of the Morgan pagonging. But definitely Heroes versus Villains. That was definitely her gameplay, but that's kind of a special case for a few different reasons.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to think of any other examples. I don't know. I feel like most people attribute stuff like that to like a bitter jury, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't know. People on the bottom usually aren't perceived as playing the best games. So yeah, there certainly hasn't been anybody in the new era like that. I'll tell you that much.
Like almost Marianne. Like Marianne was on the bottom for a little bit, but then she just stopped being on the bottom.
Yeah, that's the closest probably.
And then, I guess Gabler wasn't on the bottom. He was with Cody and Jesse the whole time. It's.
I guess Mike Worlds Apart or Ben would be the closest examples to people playing on the bottom who miraculously win in the end. But
that's a little different because you get the immunity. The immunity makes it different. It's when you're, and I guess Michelle goes on a little immunity run, but not really. Like you get it's when you have it's when you don't have immunity and you're still doing that. And it's like you're socially just grabbing somebody and being like, what are we?
I got it. Adam from Millennials versus Gen X kind of did that.
That's a good
on the bottom.
That's a good
part of the merge. Like that's an interesting season because the end game, like nobody's really like, I think David Wright is the best player on the beach at the end of that game, at least theoretically. But yeah, I think Adam fits the mold. But his allies weren't really going home that much. He was just kind of
the thing I love about Millennials versus Gen X is the rock draw is so stupid because it's the final 10. You have two groups of 5. One of the groups loses the rock draw, and then they're the final 4. The people on Jessica's side were Adam, David, Ken, and Hannah. So they lose the rock draw, and then the other 5 people go home.
Wow, I never realized that.
I
That's
love
crazy.
that about that season because I guess that means it was the right decision to go to Rocks for the four of them
Yeah.
because even if they lose, they're still the final. Even in the worst case scenario, which was, I guess, other than them going home. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
I forget. However it works, you know what I'm saying. They went to Rocks and and they lost the Rock Draw and they were the final four. What more could you ask for?
Yeah. I will say another example. This one also has a lot to do with immunity challenges, but Fabio in Nicaragua is on the bottom for a good part of the
Mm,
merge, but he also
mm,
probably wouldn't have made the end if it weren't for the immunity run. So,
mhm.
I really don't think that there's an example. I think it's just Sandra and Heroes versus Villains. I
Yeah.
think that's the only one. I've been trying to rack my brain. I guess maybe Vesepia Marquesas, because she was on the side of Sean and
Yeah,
uh,
but that was more of just like she was on the bottom and then people flipped and then she wasn't.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I
So
don't
I
think
think so
that.
maybe Sandra is the lone example, unless
Yeah,
we're completely forgetting somebody who did it without immunity. Because there's a lot of people who did it with immunity, but nobody did it. Sandra,
yeah, no.
and that's why Sandra's the goat.
Mhm, mhm. Let's talk about some specific stuff in this episode. One thing I want to talk about is Eva and Eva's little game that she had to play at the start of
Yes.
the episode, where she gets to. Well, first of all, the entire scene is interesting because she's sneaking out of camp to go on this, I guess, journey. I guess, but Shaheen and Joe both catch her, which is something that I don't
Well,
think we've ever seen in Survivor history.
Shaheen catches her. Joe then wakes Joe up. I thought
Right?
that was
Yeah.
so funny. Where it's like, oh my god, like that shot of Shaheen standing in the back while Eva goes in the beach, and he's just like, he's like a
Terrifying.
figure, and then it's like,
Yeah.
oh my god, what's he gonna do? And he wakes up Joe.
Yeah. I was saying while I was watching the episode, I was saying to the people I was watching, like Nosferatu. That's
Yeah,
the shadow in the background. That's some German expressionist stuff right
it
there.
was great. I loved that moment. That
It
was so good.
is
The
great.
and yes, I believe that is the first time in Survivor that someone they've done a lot of these little sneaking out of camp things. I have to imagine that's the unless they didn't show it for some reason, which I can't think of any reason why you'd never show it. That's the
Yeah.
first time that someone has been caught leaving camp, and I'm a little surprised that Shaheen didn't follow her, but I think that Shaheen just trusts Eva enough to not like the juice wasn't worth the squeeze of just going after her and being like, what are you doing? What are you doing in this weird fiery cove? Um, so, but good moment.
I
What do you think of this? What do you think of this journey um,
yeah.
challenge? I guess.
But before I speak on that, I want to just mention something I was thinking about during the episode, where it's like if you're on Survivor and you're on the beach and somebody gets up and goes somewhere in the middle of the night, I don't think you're thinking, oh, they're going on a journey or whatever. To me, I'd be thinking, oh, they have to use the bathroom. You know
That
what I mean?
okay, I thought that same thing, and that was crazy to me that Shaheen, like, for one thing, is waking somebody up about it. It's one thing to be
Yeah,
having the thought, but to be waking somebody up about it, and then to also be exactly correct about what happened. Where he lays out in
crazy.
confessional, where he's like, sometimes people sneak off into camp to go get an advantage. And where do you go to learn that you can go get an advantage? On reward. And where was Eva? It's just like, dude, how did you know that? how
Yeah,
like how long was she? Maybe it was like they have because he kind of sees her walk down to the ocean and like around, and maybe they have like a place where they go to the bathroom that's not that.
hmm
So maybe that was. I have no clue what was different about someone getting up on this specific instance that tipped Shaheen off to this.
yeah. I don't know. It's interesting because like I think about it in Kagayan, they don't show this on the season, but apparently like constantly throughout the season, like Tony would be searching for idols in the middle of the night, just going around doing that, and it's like I have to imagine he's not the only person in Survivor history that's ever done that ever. You know what I mean? I'm sure that people are just like getting up and doing whatever in the middle of the night
Yeah.
once in a while, like. Maybe it is just as simple as she goes down to the beach instead of going to the, bathroom area or whatever, but I don't know. Maybe we'll learn later at the end of the season. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be a good question for a Shaheen exit interview whenever that comes up. Is how the fuck did you know that? like
Yeah.
how did you fucking know that?
Yeah.
What an insane snipe. It's
Mhm.
like in Clock Tower when two people have a conversation on the first day and you're like, that's the minion and the demon. And it is, but it's like, how
Yeah.
did you know that? The entire day was two people having conversations, then going into different pairs. How the hell did you were correct, but how the hell did you know that was what it was? And you're just like, I don't know, just caught a vibe. Sometimes you just catch a vibe. Maybe Shaheen caught a vibe.
Yeah.
You ever think
Maybe.
about that?
Now I am. Now I am. To talk about this actual game,
Yes.
I guess. Eva goes and she can. What is it? She can risk her vote for an extra vote.
So she goes, she has the extra vote. It's like, okay,
Right.
congratulations, you've come to this creepy beach. You get an extra vote. Or instead of an extra vote, you can have a 50-50 chance of a safety without power, which she does and she obtains. And then it's like, okay, now you have the safety without power. Or instead of the safety without power, you can have a 1 in 3 chance at an idol. And I liked this quite a bit
Yeah.
because we can talk about the mechanics of it and whatever, and we can talk about the game balancing aspect, which I do think I was mostly favorable toward. The thing
Sure.
that I really liked about it is so rare to see someone go on a journey with decisions and make all of the correct decisions. Like, I feel like most of the
Yeah.
times where I watch a journey with that is decision based, I'm screaming at my television and being like, "Oh my god, you complete idiot! What are you doing?" Like I often think of then this wasn't a decision, but I just want to bring this up. Do you remember the 46 journey where Hunter had to put 20 seasons in order?
I think about that all the time. That's the one challenge in Survivor history I think I could literally do in my sleep. If I
I,
were unconscious and I was, in the REM sleep or whatever, I think I could do it.
there's a my girlfriend has a video or a picture or a series of photos of me watching that challenge, like freaking, like I'm stood up screaming at the TV, and I'm like, I would rather you come through my monitor and punch me in my front teeth than have to watch that fucking scene again.
I
Oh
know.
my god. When he
Yeah.
says that Parvati won Karamoan, it's like
I forgot about
where do they
that.
fucking find
Jesus.
this guy? Um
This
but
whole
anyway,
build Survivor challenge, whatever. Anyways, yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
anyway, it was nice where she walked up and it was explained to us what it was going to be, and I was like, if I'm her, I'm risking it and I'm taking the safety without power, and then I'm stopping there, and then she does exactly that, and it was just like, thank you, thank you, thank you,
Yeah.
amazing choice of the 50-50. Whenever you see one of these where they have the like 50-50, do you pick a bag when you're watching? You're like, if I was there, I'd pick that one.
I mean, I guess probably. I couldn't tell you what one I chose this time around, but yeah,
I chose incorrectly, so props to Eva.
there you go. Yeah, I gotta say, I like Eva's gameplay. I think that she's played a very good game, honestly. I hope that the jury will, if she makes the ends, not just assume that she hasn't been strategic because, they just assume that she hasn't, or that she's rode Joe's coattails. Which is true. She has done that. But like I think she's played a very solid game. She's had a public advantage for how many rounds now? And nobody's been talking about getting rid of Eva at all, like whatsoever.
The only
So
three people have mentioned it ever: Say and Charity, who went out back to back, and then Star, who changed her mind and gave her a hidden immunity idol.
yeah.
And I guess
Yeah.
Thomas kind of talked about it for a little bit, and he's gone too. So yeah, I think Eva's playing fantastically. I think the biggest hurdle for Eva in all of this is she is significantly younger than all of the cast, and
Yeah, that's true.
sometimes old casts don't like giving young people $1 million.
Yeah.
And so
See
I
Charlie. Yeah.
see Charlie, yeah, that's a good point. That's something that I didn't even think of. That maybe that was another thing that was working against Charlie. But even then, he had like Venus and Tevin, who were. But did he get no? Venus voted for Kenzie. The like he had some people who were like relatively in his age group. Eva doesn't have like anybody at all who is like.
Yeah.
I think she. I think someone else. I don't even remember who. I think it was one of the people on Vula, like Kevin or Justin, is like 27, and then everyone else is 29 or older, and
Yeah,
then
that's
Eva
right.
is 23 or 24, and
Mhm.
it's just like that isn't that the fact that Eva has gotten this far, like got through the. I guess she didn't go to tribal council pre-merge.
Still,
But still, to make it through the pre-merge and be in a good position at the merge under those circumstances is a great feat to pull off, because usually people outside of the average people the furthest outliers of age in either direction usually do not perform exceptionally well on a season of Survivor. So props to Eva for that. But I do think that if she does get to the end, I think that is a hang up that people will have. Whereas, like, are people going to view Eva as like a kid
yeah,
and
I
not
think they probably will. Yeah.
reward her? Um,
I think about speaking on this, I really like this point. Well, when I think about like the way that older people perceive younger people when they're in the position, when they're on the jury and the young people are in, the final whatever. I think about Exile Island. And the reason I think about Exile Island is on that season, you have the whole old versus young thing. But at the end of the day, you have two young people sitting in final two. You have Aris and you have Danielle. And Aris is clearly going to win the season. Like, there's no way Danielle is going to win the season. But Final Tribal Council is basically like Terry just ragging on Aris, saying, "Oh, you're just a spoiled brat who lives in a teepee, and you're entitled, and everyone hates you," or whatever. But at the end of the day, he still wins the money. But I imagine if Terry was looking at, I mean, definitely Suri for instance, but like any older person, even like Bruce from that season, like Terry's not giving a lecture like that, and part of that is
oh
just
yeah,
like their rivalry or whatever. But I think this applies to most young people who are on Survivor. Going back to Marquesas, you had Vesepia versus Nalia, who I always call Nelly because that's how it looks, like it should be said to me. You have Nelly, who's like 21, this sweet, innocent, like Mormon girl, and then you have Vesepia, who's like who's an adult. And Nalia only loses by one vote, but I think a lot of that is probably perception. So
yeah.
yeah, I think you make a really good point that I haven't considered about Eva.
And another element to it, I think, of if Eva does get to the end, and I think this is kind of a potentially a more sensitive topic, but it is something like and I don't think anyone on the season, at least not like that we have seen, and I definitely don't think anybody on the jury is going to discount her for this, but a lot of times people with autism are infantilized, and
Oh yeah,
uh, I think that is something that could play into that, like especially like there's a lot of elements of just the person that she is that is like, I worry that people will discount Eva if she gets to the end and be like, oh, like you're too young to be given $1 million, which is something that I hate,
yeah, for sure. Yeah,
for a lot of reasons. And I think it would be especially unfair if, like, consciously or subconsciously, anybody like counted Eva against her for that, because I think if anything, that's something that makes winning the game of Survivor as the first ever openly autistic contestant is like, that has to be insanely difficult to pull off.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
to even make it as far as she has, and certainly to make it to the end, would just be like what a feat that would be. And the vibe I get from this cast is that they're more likely to like just reward a good story, and Eva has a fantastic story, but it just, I think that's something that I fear. We haven't really seen any signs of anybody discounting Eva for that reason, but I fear
yeah.
that is something that she could run into.
There were two sides to that. I first of all, I completely agree with you. Unfortunately, that if Eva does get to the end, she is going to be looked at on a completely different plane than everybody else on the cast. Even Mitch. Like, I think if Mitch gets to the end, sure, his speech impediment's going to be looked at as like, I don't know. People might look at it like a little strangely, but I think for the most part, they'll just focus on his gameplay. Well, I think if Eva gets to the end, I think basically no matter what she does from this stretch forward, I think people are going to see her as riding Joe's coattails the whole
Mhm.
way through, just because they assume that, considering the touching moment from a few episodes ago of her needing Joe in that moment, I think people, consciously or not, are going to be like, oh, Eva has had to rely on Joe emotionally in this game. And therefore, she's probably also had to rely on him strategically and just
Mhm.
view it from that lens when I don't think it's that black and white.
Yeah. And I think that is in a weird way where Eva, like, I think of the most realistic path to victory I can see for Eva is if Joe goes out next episode. If
Yeah.
Joe goes out and then Eva still has her 2 advantages, like if she doesn't burn any of them or even just keeps like one of them and Joe is not there and then she is able to play the game on her own and make it to the end without Joe for the last like the real meaty stretch of the end game. I don't think I think that whole that whole thing about riding Joe's coattails has to dissolve at that point because especially if she can play the advantages correctly, if she can keep up winning immunities, if she can stay off of the bottom or be on the bottom and survive, then I think I think Eva's chances of making it to the end with Joe in the game are better, but her chances of winning at the end if she gets there, if Joe is not in the game or specifically goes out soon, I don't think there's a way that Eva could lose.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. The other thing I wanted to say about Eva is that unlike some other people in the cast, like I don't know if Joe's story is completely out there publicly. Everybody knows about Eva's story.
Mhm.
Everybody's already had time to process it. She has a great story, but if she gets to Final Tribal Council, she's not going to have a story like, say Adam or Jeremy did in their seasons, where they're going to be able to shock the jury with a tragic story that'll make them have to vote for them. Everybody already knows Eva's story. She doesn't
Mhm.
have anything that she's still hiding because, she doesn't feel like she wants to hide it, which I think is perfectly valid. While, Mitch doesn't have that either. So part of they do have great stories, and that is like threatening to the people on the cast to some extent, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, I don't know if it's actually going to pull too many votes away from people, if any, like for just Eva's story, especially considering the fact that she is probably going to be viewed as emotionally immature, or, something like that
Mhm.
because of her having autism. So, it's interesting.
Speaking of people having like a big story reveal at the end, this had kind of gotten brushed to the side for a good chunk of episodes, but was brought back up in this one where Kyle is not telling people that he's an attorney. And I
Yeah.
like low key completely forgot about that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I actually, I like to the point where this was, for part of the edit write up that I do every week, I recently rewatched the premiere and Kyle brings it up there. And I had totally forgot that he was like, he has this whole thing when he gets back to camp from losing on the journey where he's like, not only am I coming back covered in mud and empty handed, and meeting my tribe really for the first time, I'm meeting them under false pretenses where I'm lying about my entire life. And that
Yeah.
has now finally come back up. And so that is, the secret lawyer is a common occurrence in reality TV. It used to be a Big Brother exclusive, but as of Survivor 45, the secret lawyer has become kind of commonplace. Do
Mhm.
you think that that is something that people will like? Is are we looking potentially at one of those like bombshell mic drops at the end where Kyle is like, "I'm a lawyer," or do you think that this? Do you think that Joe and David like hate lawyers?
I think this is more like a Sammy is kind of bomb drop where it's like,
Mm.
I'm actually 19 or I'm actually not a millionaire.
I'm
And
actually not 45.
yeah, yeah, or Sue. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's more one of those. I don't know if anybody's gonna shift their votes because Kyle is an attorney. Now, if he's able to parlay that with, his story about him being, incarcerated and stuff like that, then I think he could probably, get a jury member to shed a tear or two, and then we could be talking about something. But I think purely him just being like, I'm an attorney, by the way, is probably not enough. But I like what you're cooking up. I feel like they wouldn't have included, well, they might have included that regardless, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
What would
It's
what would
yeah.
your big secret reveal that you would save to the end of the game and then mic drop at Final Tribal be, Joey?
At this point it'd probably be that I podcast about Survivor because like that's not
There
something
you
I probably
go.
want to reveal openly, right? Because
There
if I
you
do,
go.
then I'm taking the Asia Welch approach and I'm
Yeah.
probably gonna be out pre-merge.
I mean,
So
in Asia, nobody even knew
yeah.
except for
Well,
Teeny, and
yeah,
Teeny didn't
Teeny
even
knew.
vote for her.
Yeah. I think one other person on the cast. I think maybe like
Andy knew.
Zelensky knew. Oh, Andy
Andy
knew.
knew.
Yeah, yeah.
Jelinski. Jelinski
I,
wasn't
d-
even on that season.
I don't know. Oh, right.
Um,
Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. New era. It all blends together.
yeah.
But yeah. Uh, let's get back to this advantage talk because
Oh
we got
yes,
off
yeah,
track.
we got way. I forgot we didn't even finish that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the safety without power advantage?
So this is a good question. This is something I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm willing to blast you with a hot take right now. I think a safety without power is better than having an idol. Um,
Ring the bell. Where's the bell? Ring the bell. Shake the maraca of push pins. Joey, I agree. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I think everything that is bad about having a hidden immunity idol, for the most part, does not apply to safety without power. With safety without power, you can't really play it incorrectly. I mean, you can if you're not going to get any votes, but like the nice thing about safety without power is the fact that you don't have power in the vote. That's the good thing about it. It's supposed to be the bad thing about it, but it's the good thing about it because let's say one time that I can remember being used is Jeremy. Jeremy used it in Winners of War, and it didn't work out very well for him in the end. But it was also good for him in the sense that he was not in the vote that sort of shifted the game. So theoretically, he could have gone back under and sort of been, not looked at as this person flipped the game, which is something that I think you can do with safety without power, that you can't do with an idol. Idols are also things that like if they're public, you can get blindsided with an idol. This is true of safety without power as well, but with safety without power, it's a little different in the sense that you also can't once again play it incorrectly. But you could also this is something that we haven't seen that I really hope we do see on this season is the double safety without power and hidden immunity idol play, which I think would be very fun. But that's besides the point. Yeah, no, that's just my general thoughts. I don't know. I like it more.
I have said this. So I have said this since Jeremy received the first safety without power advantage back in Winners at War. Since he received it, not even since he played it, since he received it, the safety without power advantage is the best, probably the best thing you could have in the game, and also the most well-designed advantage from like a game balancing standpoint possible. It
Yeah.
is functionally perfect. I believe it has only been used twice. I believe it's just Jeremy and Rachel who've ever used one. Jeremy kind of had a funky use of it, but he was still safe. And then Rachel, of course, an amazing use of the safety without power advantage. And then I think Drew is the only other person who's ever had one. And then Drew's he kind of like, I think he like they do the split tribal on the round where it expires and he like doesn't have his bag.
Oh right, yeah,
And so he just
yeah.
doesn't play it.
I forgot about that.
So safety without power, what I love about it is twofold. One, I think the stated detriment, I agree, is kind of not really even a detriment, where it can kind of disguise your position in the game.
Yes.
I think that
Which is what Rachel did so well. Yeah.
I think the concept of having your vote for most rounds of Survivor is overrated.
Agreed.
Which is why I don't necessarily hate the vote loss stuff too much, because I think it rarely, if ever, really, really matter. In the pre-merge, it seems to matter a lot, but the bigger the group, the less that will likely matter.
Yeah.
This season, of course, has been a big exception for some fucking reason. It has been every time someone has lost their vote, it has been specifically the reason that they lose the game. So this season may not be the best season to say that. But so I think that detriment is like kind of overstated in the power of it. You're just like, I'm going to be safe at this tribal council, I think, and then you don't even need to like gauge anything. You just leave. The actual detriment to it, the thing that actually makes it interesting is I think the only other advantage that I can really point to is also having this, which is knowledge is power, but knowledge is power is kind of silly for other reasons.
Yeah.
Is that the real detriment to the advantage, the real negative side effect is that it just pisses people off.
Yeah.
There is no way to use the safety without power advantage that doesn't make everybody fucking mad at you.
I think Eva's probably playing it the best way that you can in terms of not pissing people off by letting everybody know about it, which I think is also a really interesting game state because once again, it makes it way harder to blindside one of Joe or Eva.
Yeah,
which makes them want to keep them in their good graces.
Because they can Eva the double, as you said, the double safety without power idol play is that she can just give Joe one of the things, and she can be like, "Here, Joe, play this idol. I'm gonna safety without power. You play this idol, and then it'll be all good." And the other thing about this that is insane to me, Joey, about this particular safety without power that we find ourselves talking about in this game. Mm-hmm. Every other instance of the safety without power has... So, Jeremy's expired at the final 10. Drew's also expired at the final 10, which was a split tribal council, but we never got to see how that played out. And then Rachel's was a 1-round use only. And I believe... Was that the final 10? No, it was not the final. It was the final 12.
Yeah, but either way, it was a big tribal council.
Yes, but yeah, Eva's expires, and this is insane to me, at the final 7.
7, yeah,
that's crazy.
It's crazy.
So I guess that's only 2 rounds to use it, but she has an idol and a safety without power. If Eva just says, you know what, I have these 2 things, everybody knows about them, I'm just going to use them, Eva is in the final 6.
Yeah.
She can just go there, which I don't know. I think it's probably, knowing Eva, it's probably more likely that she'll use one of the things to help Joe, or maybe she'll hold on to the idol for a little longer. But if I'm Eva and my entire alliance is just going to war right now, I think that's probably what I do. I think I probably idle 1 round and safety without power the next, and I just get the fuck out of there.
Once again, it's kind of tough to read into the next time on Survivors, but it seems like, according to what we're seeing potentially, it doesn't look like Eva's going to be on the hot seat next episode either. It looks like it's going to be Joe, if anybody. So, assuming, and this is the big assumption, that Eva can make it past this next episode, she has 3 rounds to go and 2 advantages. Oh, and by the way, she's one of the most physically strong people on the season still, especially now that David's gone. And she's athletic in a different way that Joe is, or, Kyle is, where she's sort of well-rounded. She has more leg strength than the 2 of them, which I think is very useful in terms of these balance challenges and stuff like that. So I think Eva's in a really good spot. If she wins 1 of 3 immunity challenges, she is a lock for final 5.
Yeah.
So,
which is completely bonkers. It is insane to have that security this late in the game. And then also, another sort of meta reason as to why I like Eva not going for the idol and just sticking with the safety without power, beyond the fact that I do kind of agree with you that safety without power is like low-key better than the idol, is that every single person who has held 2 idols at the same time has lost the game. It is a total curse. You do not want it. You keep that. If I have an idol, the last thing in the world that I want is a second idol.
Frankly, I think a safety without power in an idol is pretty scary already. I saw Eva get that, and I'm like, oh god, is it gonna happen? Is it gonna happen again?
It is. It's sometimes people get the pot cooking, and they like hoard up all these advantages, and then it just doesn't work out. They completely it's like the Drea in 42. I believe Drea, going into the tribal council that she's voted out at, has 4 advantages.
Yeah, she has an idol. I think she has like an extra vote, or maybe
the idol, either the extra vote or the steal a vote. Oh, she has the she has the she shares the amulet with Lindsay at that point.
Right. Yeah.
Which currently could be played with a steal a vote if Lindsay consents. She has whatever it was that she pulled out of the hole when she reaches her. I think was an extra vote.
I think that sounds right. It was an advantage.
She has an advantage, and then maybe I'm thinking 4 because she also has her shot in the dark or something. So she's like kitted the fuck up, and then somebody else, the knowledge is power happens, and she loses that, and then she just kind of goes out. She plays the extra vote, I think, or it was maybe a block vote or something. She just goes out swinging, and it's you could hoard up all of these trinkets and still, shit the bed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting for sure. Once again, I think Eva's in a great spot.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of if she gets to the end, which seems more and more likely the more things seem to go on, whether she'll be able to talk about it. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to look at other interesting stuff in the episode. I mean, it was a pretty simple episode overall in the sense that David went home, but I mean, I it's in, I know we already talked about Mary, but I have to throw Mary out there again because I need to talk about the strong five and her position in it because it is so fascinating to me where she is the one kind of trying to dictate the vote. She's the one saying, "Oh yeah, I want to get the vote on Camilla." And in this episode, they're all talking at the beach, and David's like, "Well, Mary still wants Camilla. You still want to get rid of Mary, right? Or you still want to get rid of Camilla, right, Mary?" And it's interesting because it's almost like they're trying to force her, or she's trying to force herself to be a power player in this alliance. And Kyle and Shaheen are kind of looking at each other like, "What? When did you get here?"
Yeah. Where did Mary come from?
Yeah,
We always come back to where did Mary come from? It is, you definitely chose the wrong guy. Did not pick the correct person to hitch the cart to Mary. But still in the game.
yeah. I want to ask you straight up: if you're Kyle or Shaheen, or I guess Camilla, would you rather vote out David or Mary at that last tribal council?
Oh, 1,000%. Especially if I'm Kyle, I'm voting out David there because if I have this point of conflict with David, that is my. There are two people in Survivor. There are the people who are in the active beef, and there are people who are not in the active beef. If you are not in the active beef, your prerogative at all costs should be as long as possible keep the active beef in the game. And if you are in the active beef, your prerogative at all costs for as long as possible should be get the other person out of the game so that the beef is resolved. And so Kyle and David are in the active beef. It is Kyle's best interest is to resolve the David beef so that it cannot be used against him going forward in the game. Because the longer it stays around, he's starting off in the strong position of being the one more favorable in the beef. The longer it is kept around as like a pitting two people against each other who are always going to look at each other kind of thing, the more time you give it for it to swing the other way into David's favor. So absolutely, if I'm Kyle, this is what I'm doing. I'm getting rid of David. Shaheen, I think I don't know that this was the prime pick from the bunch here. I think that maybe getting rid of Mary has a little bit more legs to it. Because of the reason of you keep Kyle and David in the game. And Shaheen, I don't think knows it, but David being in the game was kind of the reason that Kyle and Camilla stopped looking at him. And he didn't really know they were looking at him. And maybe going forward, that is on pause even without David in the game. But I think this opens a door now where Kyle doesn't have anything better to do. So if he could go back onto the get out Shaheen thing. So I think if Mary goes out there, then you can still kind of like play the entire field where, okay, Mary's gone. The strong six was never really the strong six. It's really the strong five. But I know that Kyle and David are going to go after each other. So I don't really have to worry about it imploding on me specifically. And also the Logi have, or I guess it would be five. I guess it would be 4-4 Logi Siva in that point, but they're not playing by that anyway. It's just I feel like it makes Shaheen probably the safest. I don't think getting David out is a bad move for him. I just don't think it was probably the number one ideal on the list.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'll even add a little more to why, for Shaheen specifically, getting rid of Mary would have been even better for his game. Imagine the fallout just between David and Joe. If Joe votes Mary to go home, we're already we're going to get a little bit of fallout probably at Final Tribal Council. But imagine the fallout if David goes back to camp, Mary goes home, and Eva and Joe have just flipped on him. And all the talk about honor and integrity is gone. Like, that is not only now a beef between David and Kyle, it's a beef between David and Kyle and David and Joe, and to
Joe.
some extent David and Eva, which in some sense makes David public enemy number one, so maybe he's gone next. But on the other hand, like there's an avenue there if you want to play with the people from the bottom. Like, to me, even though I've been, saying that Mary is not going to win for the past few weeks, like, to me, David was just as big of a goat as Mary, if not a bigger one, because even like Chrissy was saying in the last episode, like, I'm not voting for you if you make the end, like, publicly, like, before she got voted out. So, yeah.
I think I definitely agree with that. I think the David Joe beef that ensues from that is like fantastic.
Yeah.
But I think I disagree that then the play is keep David in the game after that. Because I think you can pretty much just guarantee like David is the next one to go home.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
you just let it play out. And then you walk away from that with Joe and Eva, like you are in with them. If anybody's going to try, and maybe I've talked myself out of it because of the advantages that are the word is getting out there about the advantages. If somebody tries to make a move historically, is Eva going to play the idol or is she going to play it on Joe? Well, she's not going to play it on Shaheen, so let's vote for Shaheen.
Yeah,
so that is
true.
maybe I've just talked myself out of that. But at the very least, you're walking. Either way, I do agree that walking into the next round with David and Kyle going at it, David and Joe going at it, gives him the most options and allows him to. I think it makes him certainly the safest at the final 8. I don't think there's any reason that anybody votes out Shaheen at the final 8 if Mary goes home there. And I think maybe if the people like Star was coming after Shaheen for some fucking reason, and Mary clearly would like for Shaheen to go also. So maybe next episode it all just comes crashing down on Shaheen.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because the way that that we've seen from the edit, it's like Shaheen theoretically, like if you just look at the merge gameplay, it seems like he's in a good position. It seems like people, like everybody's working with him. No one's like actively against him. But then you get to like the Chrissy episode, and the one vote that's not on Chrissy is on Shaheen. So everybody's clearly still throwing his name out as like a big strategic threat. Like I said during the pre-merge that Shaheen struck me as like the Ricard of this season. Like somebody who has a big beard and is like very, very strategic, and everybody knows he's strategic. It's just a matter of when to take the shot, basically.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's kind of the position Shaheen's in right now, but he's way more under the radar than Ricard was, which is a big plus for his gameplay. And another reason why, as I said before, I think he, if I had to pick one person, is the most likely to win right now. But,
And I think that is another reason why the being in the Strong People's Alliance was a great decision for Shaheen to get into. Even though we really haven't heard much from Shaheen about the Strong People Alliance, we get the one thing from him like a few episodes ago about him being like, hey, like all the strong guys want to work together. This is doomed to fail, but when it fails, it will fail at each other and probably not at me. Like eventually the egos are going to get in the way of each other and then he's going to come out unscathed, and they have. But because I feel like if this doesn't come to fruition and we see like David and then say like Joe and Eva kind of go out in the spots like of like that Chrissy, Charity, and Say went out, then when it gets to a point where it's like, oh, we're going to clearly have this like scrappy under the radar player slip by in that group of people where it's like the two big guys are Shaheen and Kyle. And then you have like the Camillas and the Says and the Charities and the Marys running around and the Mitches. Shaheen is not going to fly under anybody's fucking radar in that world. But in this world that we are living in, where it's the final 9 has arrived and it's the egos are clashing, and then you have this thing now going into the final 8 of Joe and Eva to prop up, Shaheen can fit the category of like the sneaky under the radar, like slides in and wins it, because there is this thing bigger than him, both physically and also in terms of presence in the game.
Shaheen is a really interesting figure just in terms of like his perception, because he is one of the probably the only contestant in Survivor history that has a perception of himself despite not being famous whatsoever prior to going on Survivor. And that's purely because of all the pre-season stuff with 46 and all the stuff about this big bearded guy who seems very strategic. And then you get on the beach and it's like, oh, well, this big bearded guy seems really strategic. And that perception, I don't know how many people actually like knew about that 46 pre-season stuff, but I think a few people probably did.
The
So
only person who mentioned it in their preseason press was actually Camilla. Camilla was the only person who, at least not that guaranteed, knew it was like that Shaheen was the mysterious bearded man from 46, but that like because some people might not have mentioned it, but Camilla specifically mentions this is the season 46 alternate. I'm fucking coming after this guy. And then now we kind of see that come to fruition where Camilla talks about getting rid of Shaheen for a little bit. And then now kind of like they didn't really interact much this episode, but are now kind of a pair that has been put together. And like, I think it is probably in the best interest of Kyle of Camilla to not just pivot back to let's get rid of Shaheen here. Like, I think keeping Shaheen on their side, because Shaheen, yes, I think he has the capability to like undercut and like blindside and be ruthless and like just straight up lie to people's faces. But I do think he is more loyal than the average bear here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And Kyle and Camilla have a couple rounds, like a margin of buffer here where they can let that be for them before they take the shot that I do think they have to take at some point. I don't think it's urgent anymore now that this has all transpired and Shaheen kind of has to work with them.
No, I mean, I think Shaheen is, I mean, like I said, I think he's the most likely to win the season right now, but that's because he's been loyal. He hasn't been disloyal to anybody. Like even on the Thomas vote, like it's not like he was, like, oh man, yeah, I want to get rid of Thomas. I'm glad you did that. He was like, no, I'm very sad that you got rid of Thomas. And he also seems to be playing surprisingly emotionally, which I think is honestly a good thing for his game.
Yeah.
Because he used his story to, link up with Kyle and Camilla. And that seems like a very strong bond, even still. So yeah, I think Shaheen's playing great. And also like I don't mean to just like assume somebody's good at something because of their, profession, but like the dude's a debate professor. So like if he gets the final three, like surely he wins, or at least he gets a good amount of votes. You know what I mean? Like,
I would love to see him and Kyle in the final three together, which is
great.
never going to happen. But I would love to see the two of them just kind of like slug it out over like, oh, I'm an attorney and here's my lawyer's speech. And then he goes, well, I'm a debate professor. Fuck you. And they do their like professions and see who comes out on top. And then I'd feel so sorry for whoever the most zero vote of all the zero vote finalists of all time, whoever would be sitting next to them in that final three. But
yeah,
my God, that would be cool to watch.
This is just making me wish for a world where David did not go home this episode. He got his wish and Camilla went home, and somehow he gets these strong people to the end, and somehow the final three is him, Kyle, and Shaheen. And Kyle and Shaheen are debating, and meanwhile David's in the middle just being trashed on by everybody for letting this happen.
It'd be so good.
It'd be so good.
Yeah. I was gonna kind of. Well, is there anything else from this episode that was really we didn't get to?
I think we kind of talked about it all. I'm looking in case I've missed something particularly interesting, but I think we've talked a good amount about all the strategy. Okay, I did want to say this really quickly, just about the actual vote out on David, because the entire tribal council, they're asking David questions about like, well, you lost the immunity challenge. Like, could this be enough for you to go home? And David's like, yeah, anything can happen on Survivor. And then he gets blindsided and he is pissed off. Like, he honestly never saw a world where it was actually going to happen, which is really interesting to me. I mean, I guess he was just trying to like play it up, was trying to act, but it's been a while since I've seen someone that actually like, oh, they're going to kill someone, when they get voted out.
I think the last person that I can think of that like is comparable to this is James Jones in Survivor 43, where he's just fucking like mad, like and then he has to go sit on the jury because it's the split tribal, and then he has to
Oh
go
my
sit
God.
there, and he's like pulling the buff over his face, and he's got his like hands on his head, and he's just like angry. However, David, amazing final words from David. Have you watched David's final words?
I mean, I saw the final confessional he had during the
Yes.
episode. Yeah.
That was I thought that was such a good way to. I love when a survivor is somehow, some way, and because I imagine the final words, they're not like sat there speaking for 15 minutes and then they take a blurb of it. I imagine it's probably a pretty quick, like, they want to go eat.
I think it depends. I know it used to be really long. Like there's like unedited clips of like Tammy from Survivor Marquesas like trying to say like, okay, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna be like, and she's like talking for like 10 minutes, and they somehow like cut it down to a nice little snippet. So I don't know.
Well, maybe this is more edited than it came off, but David's like, it just perfectly summed up his story. Exactly, like he brings back his episode 1 theme of like the hero and villain thing, where he's like, there are no heroes, there are no villains,
Yeah,
there are just
great.
people. You could be a hero one day and be the villain the next, and then he ties it off by saying, "Well, I'm gonna go drink chocolate milk now." It's like he knew exactly what his edit was gonna be, and then he perfectly just knocks it out of the park at the very end. Just like I thought that was great from David. A fantastic final words from David.
Yeah. Once again, David, extremely interesting survivor figure. And you know what I really can't believe? I can't believe that thing with the girlfriend was like completely real and he wasn't exaggerating any of it. I can't believe that it was really like his girlfriend really actually said to him, okay, the only situation where I won't break up with you is if you win $1 million. Like, that is ridiculous.
That's crazy. That's something you say. That's like, if she's saying that to him, that if he came back and he was like, "Babe, I won," she'd be fucking pissed. She was just saying that as like a get out. Like,
exactly.
And she. Oh my God, that story broke of like, he got dumped. That was nuts. So oh my God. That's messed up.
I mean, that takes like Cat from Blood versus Water saying you'll never date someone who doesn't make the merge to Hayden to like a whole nother level. Like I in the sense I almost feel bad for David. On the other sense, man, I don't feel bad for David. On the other hand, because I don't want to put this out into the world, but some of the stuff he's been saying the past few episodes, I've been like, okay,
yeah, pump the brakes here, buddy.
Yeah.
What does 9th place get on Survivor? Like 30K?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
What do you think he was like? I'm getting this. It's not $1 million, but you think he made that pitch?
He goes back to his little trailer and is like, "Honey, I made money.
I got something.
Yeah,
I got something." That's pretty good. That's like you can get an apartment. Well, I guess he lives in where does he live? California.
Yeah,
you can't do shit with $30,000. What is that? Like a week of in and out?
That's a week of renting out someone's walk-in closet. that's nothing.
Yeah, that's nothing in California. So maybe. Jeez. Good. So I thought this was a good episode of Survivor. I thought it was, and I haven't even been as low on the past couple weeks as a lot of people have, but I thought this was a noticeable improvement from the past couple weeks. This episode, I thought the stakes were great. The result was great. The setup for where the season's going to go from here, fantastic.
Yeah.
Joey, what I want to ask you, surely somebody, I don't know how much of the 50 casting rumors you've been keeping up with, but surely somebody from this season is going to be on 50, right?
Yeah.
Who's your pick right
now? I've been trying to avoid season 50 casting rumors. I've heard like blurbs of like, there seems to be a lot of old school players maybe coming back. Like I've heard stuff like that. But I've been trying to avoid it for the most part. So with that in mind, I'm thinking who would actually come back as like a legend of the game. And to be honest, I don't think most of the stereotypically good players on the season are going to be looked at for that. Like, sure, like, Kyle or Shaheen could pull off great moves and like they could be looked at as like survivor legends. But I think they're most likely to just bring back interesting contestants who like are memorable. So I think honestly, you're looking at one of two people. You're looking at Say or you're looking at Eva. That's what I think.
That's pretty much where I am, and I'm leaning much more in the Eva camp of things
Agreed.
because for one thing, she's made it further and seems to have a good chance to make it a lot further than Say, and that usually bodes well for your chances. And also, Jeff made the comment like a few months ago where he was like we don't want people who like hold a grudge or like we're trying to have like a positive energy to season 50, and Say
Yeah.
is fantastic television. But positive energy, absolutely fucking not. Oh my
Yeah.
god, like that is not what they're. So I hope we get to see Say again. I think that like it's possible we'll get like a just like a 53 or a 54 could be like an all stars
Sure.
type dealy. But 50 they're going more for like a wide scope. And I don't I think Eva fits that probably pretty well. But yeah, that Eva right now is in my mind the front runner of person from this season who we're going to see
Yeah.
this time next year on
I think
Survivor.
I think Eva also fulfills something that I'm sure will be an important part of season 50, just based on the small rumblings that I've heard through birds in the air, which is like they want people who are memorable and like who people know. And Eva is probably the most memorable moment of the entirety of the new era, and it just happened like a month ago.
Yeah, it got
Um,
like the YouTube views on that fucking clip were crazy. Joe and Eva were doing joint interviews together.
Joe threw out the first pitch at an A's game. Like it was like their second home game ever in Sacramento, and he threw out the first pitch. Like, I mean, Joe's also a possibility
Yeah,
to get
Joe.
on
I think
50.
Joe's
But
definitely up there. I just think there's probably a lot more Joes in the casting pool
absolutely,
than there
yeah,
are there. I think Eva is the only Eva in the casting pool.
yeah. To
Um,
put it simply, this sounds rude, but it's really not meant to be. Like Eva has a gimmick and has something interesting for people, like a little bit of intrigue on Survivor 50. Joe, I don't think would really have any intrigue that you
yeah,
wouldn't be able to get from like, I don't know, say a Terry or
mhm.
a, I don't know. There's a million of them. Old
Joe
from the
is
old,
he is just a guy.
he's just a guy.
He's just a nice dude.
Yeah, exactly. He seems like a very nice gentleman with a great name. Shouts out to people named Joe. But that's about it, honestly. And Eva has this emotional, poignant moment that united people across the country. They're talking about it on like Good Morning America and stuff
I
like
know.
that. So like, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I will ask you one final big question,
I'm ready.
which is a pretty simple one. We're at final eight now. Who do you think's going home next?
Oh God, Joey. Oh my God. I think there's so many different ways that this could go from here. I think this is kind of the turning point for the season, and the eventual winning story will start to emerge in this next episode, depending on which direction this final 8 round plays out.
Yeah,
So I think that the possibilities are endless. If I think I kind of talked myself into this a little bit while we were having the conversation, and I'll say I'll stamp this prediction down just because, and just kind of because you specifically said he's most likely to win. I am going to say I think that maybe if if the pendulum ever is to swing against Shaheen, I think right now is the time where that will happen. I think
yeah,
this little window that he is in is going to be his most treacherous in the foreseeable future. I think if Shaheen isn't the winner, it's very likely he goes out at 8.
yeah. I think that's a good call. I do think that this is probably it's either this or it's like final five to me is like the
Mhm.
spot where he's most
The
vulnerable.
typical dragon spots.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. I'm gonna do this from like reverse. I'm gonna like do elimination of who I don't think is gonna go home to try to
Okay.
figure out who I do think is gonna go home. I think Eva's gonna be okay.
Yes.
I think Camilla's going to be okay. I think Star's going to be okay. I think Mary's going to be okay. So that leaves Shaheen, Kyle, Mitch, and Joe. I still think Joe's a little too well integrated to go home at this point. He might be the backup vote. He might be the vote that doesn't go through, but I don't actually see him going home. Maybe that's just me looking at it with my heart, but I don't see him going home. So Shaheen, Kyle, or Mitch. Mitch looks like he's going to be on the offensive and try to create a vote here, and I still think he's under the radar enough so that he can probably I don't know. I'm not going to say Shaheen. I think Shaheen's going to be okay. So I'm going to say between Kyle and Mitch. And I don't know. Kyle made himself really visible this last episode.
Mhm.
Mitch has not. And Kyle is on this majority. It's really who do you think is going to win out? Like the majority or the minority, like alliance, if you think that those are real things. And I think Kyle at this point should be looked at as way bigger of a threat than Mitch. And I think something we sort of see in the new era a lot is like if you poke your head up in terms of making a move, you're going to immediately be hit on the head like it's whack-a-mole and you're going to go home next. So I'm going to say Kyle goes home. I think
that's possible. I think,
Yeah.
that's a good point. That the whack-a-mole of it all is because I think there's a lot of people who could possibly take credit for this move, and I think you want credit for the David boot at Final 3, and I think you really don't want it at Final 8. And maybe it'll come down to just, hey, who just pulled that off? Get rid of him.
Yeah, like for instance, if at the end Camilla is sitting at the end with say, I don't know, Star and Mary or whatever, she can be like, hey, David was trying to get the vote on me, but I was able to make it so that, it was on him instead. Like, even though, that's kind of not true, but like you could play it off and you could make the case that that's true. While Kyle, I think, is like probably the person that most made the move, honestly, if there's any one person, but I don't think he'll make the end to be able to say that he actually did that. So, yeah. Cool.
We'll see. We're probably both wrong.
Yeah, we're probably both wrong. Do you have any final thoughts on the episode?
The one thing that we didn't talk about, and I like that Camilla specifically repeated her confessional from last episode. Like, she made the Olympics joke again.
Yep.
And I liked that. It was it was so nice we did it twice. So Camilla, what good confessionals from Camilla. Great, very gifted in the confessional.
Oh, I have one other thing. So I said that, I think Shaheen is most likely to win the season at this point, but my personal winner pick from episode 1 was Joe, who I'm still rooting for. Who do you think's going to win? Who's your winner pick?
So as I specifically stated, I'm doing my edit thing. So most of my lens is through that, and I have my own little series, and this has been a very tricky season. I'm down to 3 people on that I have personally left in contention. Do you want me to share who those people are, or are you plugging my ears, not listening to Edgic stuff? Are you an active avoider?
I'm an active avoider, I'd say.
Okay, then I won't go too into it. I'll just say I think the person that is just the biggest question mark for me at this point of a big thing for me, and I will speak to the edit, but I won't speak to my own personal researching. In the 46 home stretch, the big debate was it was clear that Kenzie or Charlie was going to win, but it was not clear at all which one. And for me, the big thing that signaled that it was going to be Kenzie specifically was Charlie's edit spoke for himself. He was doing all of this stuff. It was clear why Charlie was getting such a good edit. It was not clear at all why Kenzie was being edited so well and why we were seeing so much of her insight in the game when things weren't going her way, and when they were going her way, she wasn't really doing much to make that happen.
Yeah.
The person that kind of, I'm getting that vibe from of okay, I wouldn't say that this person's edit is better than most of the other people, or that this person is necessarily positioned well in the game, but I just can't figure out why we're spending so much time and hearing so much from this person. I will put my stamp on the underdog of Mitch. I think that somehow, some way, Mitch is going to pull this off. and I have
Interesting.
absolutely no idea how that's going to happen. It pretty much doesn't make any sense. But like, why like why is Mitch being portrayed differently than like Star and Mary, basically?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really interesting point. Um, I'll have to think about that because that is a good question. Um, but yeah, did you have any final thoughts, or you could wrap this up?
No, yeah, that's yeah. If Shaheen goes home next and Mitch wins, you heard it here first, which means that that's pretty safely not what's going to happen because I'm mostly wrong. So no, yeah.
All right.
Thanks for having me, Joey.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for hopping on, Alec, and thank you to everybody for listening. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.